Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from last week. Let's get to it. Trisha and Dr. Drew videos that I did last week. Lauren Ann says, I am a borderline traits person. I've been in DBT for 7 years. I'd say I've made a lot of progress in giving other people the benefit of the doubt rather than being sure that they are out to get me. I still have issues with abandonment and self-worth, but I am far less reactive than I used to be. I'm also in a 4-year-long secure and loving relationship that continues to expose me to corrective experiences. Well, good for you, Lauren Ann. You are doing the good work to heal and help your relationships. So good for you. Fukai says, I wish I could find a therapist as good as Dr. Kirk. I've encountered so many bad therapists. It's caused a major distrust of therapists as a whole. Yeah, Fukai, I have heard from many people like this. And there are many therapists, quote unquote, as good as I am. You just have to find the right one. And sometimes it's just a matter of finding a good fit. So sometimes you have to shop around a bit. But you deserve a therapist that you connect with, that understands you, that specializes in your area. And continue looking. It's just a matter of time usually. So, and I also understand that if you've had a string of bad therapists, that it makes it hard to want to try that again. One of the pieces of advice that I have for people who have been demoralized this way is say, look, I'm going to look at 5 to 10 therapists. I'm probably not going to like most of them, but one of them might actually be a good candidate. I think that attitude is much more workable than, I really hope the next therapist that I randomly come across happens to be the one, because it might not be, right? So just, as if you watch my channel, I'm sure you're on board with the idea that we all deserve therapy. The Giddy Owl says, the bit about memories being encoded through an emotional filter really hit hard after my therapy session yesterday. Gotta keep that in mind as I go over memories of family members because I'm trying to work through the grudges and biases that I have. Right, the Giddy Owl, absolutely. A lot, for all of us, but particularly those of us who have relational trauma wounds, our memories aren't necessarily accurate, or at least they can be biased, right, as you're saying. So, and that our feelings can be based on that misperception and that distortion. We will see hurt when it's not actually happening, and then we remember it as being very hurtful, and then we feel very hurt, and then we're much more depressed and much less trustful of other people, when it's possible that our memories are being encoded through the filter of emotion. And if we look at that with some bit of skepticism or critical thinking, we might be able to really help ourselves out and our relationships. And then it causes a cascade effect the other direction, because when you see everything as a hurtful thing, then you feel hurt, you feel depressed, you feel distrustful, you get angry at people, you push people away, or you might even find people that are hurtful to you because it just matches with your reality. And then that just causes more hurt, more hurt, more hurt. Whereas the opposite, if we start to look, well, maybe I'm distorted here, and maybe some of my memories are not exactly how it feels. Maybe it was a little hurtful, but not as hurtful. And it's, this is true for everyone, whether you're on the borderline spectrum or not, that I guarantee you most, if not all, of your reactivity to your spouse is debatable with regards to how you see it and how you narrativize it. And you might experience, I hope you experience this, the second phase. The first phase of a fight with a spouse is you might notice thoughts going through your mind of, this relationship isn't going to work, this person is a jerk face, they don't listen to me, they don't care about my feelings. And this is a universal. And then the second phase is after you've calmed down and your body has regulated, maybe some time has passed, and you can look back and think, wow, I was pretty distorted back then. Right now, I'm good in this marriage, I'm good in this relationship, it's fine. I don't like that happened, but I was in a really bad mood during the fight or right after the fight. So for borderline individuals, it's much worse than that. It's more exaggerated than that, pronounced than that. But all of us go through that. And we can do a lot for ourselves by thinking in the moment when we are distorted or when we're having a rare negative narrative, episode, say to ourselves, maybe I'm in a negative narrative episode right now. I need to, one of the things that so there are three phases. One is to be completely unaware and to give in to the negative narrative in the moment that won't persist. Now, some negative narratives do persist. Like, they don't go away. And months later, you're like, yeah, I don't think this relationship is working because I don't like the way this makes me feel. So I'm not saying that your feelings or your narratives are always wrong if they're negative. That's not what I'm saying. But often if we have a phase one and phase two. But so phase one of the awareness cycle is you just give into the negative narrative and it is what it is and you believe it. Phase three, what we're trying to get to, is where in the moment you can be like, probably distorted right now, and if I give it some time, I'm guessing my narrative will change. The in-between phase that I work with clients on is just introduce a question mark, and I talked about that in the video, that just ask the question, am I distorted? You don't have to answer it, and if you can't say yes yet, then that's okay, but just asking the question is a huge step toward health and towards more self-awareness. Anyway, Brianna says, wow, I've been called dramatic my whole life, but hearing you speak on why someone may be dramatic really helped me to understand myself a bit more, and it still made me feel validated. Yeah, for some people, particularly in the histrionic, borderline narcissistic spectrum, they will sometimes be called dramatic in a negative way. Oh, you're so dramatic. Everything's a big deal. Your emotion, everything's about you. And it can compound the relational trauma and abandonment feeling that started the whole dramatic presentation to begin with. So it's important to not see yourself as purposely dramatic in this hurtful or narcissistic way. It's a defense. Smelnalita says, this was one of the best YouTube videos I've ever seen, the Trish and Dr. Drew. I mean, you read Trisha like I've never seen before. You're transforming my thoughts and biases. Well, that's nice to hear. Thank you so much. One of the best YouTube videos that you've ever seen. Oh, well, I'm glad I did it. Healing says, these videos are some of the most helpful I've ever seen, probably because I've identified with Trisha for the past 5 years. Thank you for helping me more than any therapist I've seen in the past. Well, that makes me sad that you haven't had a lot of helpful therapists. So again, as I said before, find one that you connect with because you deserve that. But thanks for the nice, statement. It's interesting because people sent me that video. They say, "Oh, you should react to this," Dr. Drew, Trisha, and I, I'm pretty busy, and I thought, well, we'll check it out, and I made the reaction videos, and it was interesting because there was so much to say. I remember within the first 7 minutes of the video, I had already been talking for a half an hour or something, and you just never know what is going to provoke me to yammer. Darcy and Stacy videos. Amanda says, I do not want to fall into the misogynistic trope of, this is what I was saying. I do not want to fall into the misogynistic trope of being a man commenting on women and how they look. End of my quote. Love to finally hear someone on YouTube say this. Yeah, so it's interesting to me, the thoughts that me and my people will say, people around me, and then I put it on YouTube and people will be like, that's a weird thing. I'm glad that he's saying that, but I've never heard people, or that's rare that, I'm like, it is, it's unfortunate that it's rare on the internet for a man such as myself to acknowledge the several misogynistic tropes, including a man commenting on how women look and their surgeries that they do for themselves, or even the tattoos. It's all in that category. Another example in this category is men telling women to smile. Like, oh, you could smile, and it's if you don't know, and maybe you do, the reason why that is problematic is because it would happen a lot, and it's based on this notion that women are there to please men, and that women are supposed to be pleasant, that women aren't supposed to be blank or angry or upset. They are supposed to suppress their feelings and always like they're a servant to men. And so men would walk by women and say, you could smile, or, I'd really like to see a smile on you. And it's invasive, it's gross, it's misogynistic, it is objectifying, it is seeing women as this extension of your own, like you own women, you can tell them what to do. Just imagine a woman, 20-year-old woman walking up to a 55-year-old man in Safeway and going like, you could smile. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, it's always interesting to do stuff like that, of just kind of switch it around, because we get so used to misogynistic and sexist behaviors that it feels natural, like catcalling or something. And I remember the first example that I always think about this was, 25 years ago. Often there's a liquor, some sort of Canadian whiskey. Is it Black Velvet? Or I can't remember. Anyway, it's some sort of, and there are these ads, and there's this big ad in West Seattle on a billboard, and there's this scantily dressed woman in a fancy dress, and she's lounging, and then there's the liquor next door, and it just looks natural. It's like, well, that's what ads look like. But then if you think about just putting a man in that position, like a Burt Reynolds type of man next to the whiskey, and the man is like, or the poses, and you're like, oh yeah, that doesn't look right. There's something wrong with that. But yet we've just become so accustomed to seeing advertisements with women in extremely objectifying poses. Is it, a crime against humanity that these ads are happening? Maybe not, but it is an example of an overall sexist, misogynistic culture. And when we reverse the genders sometimes, or put a cis man in there, it's like it is a stark reminder of just how odd it is. Anyway, so yeah, from the beginning, I don't know if y'all have noticed, but I have not been commenting on Darcy's plastic surgery. There have been many scenes, and other people on the show too, Larissa included, others, Angela, and I just don't have. I've purged myself years ago of the impulse and the foundation for such misogynistic kinds of statements. I just don't have a thought about it. I mean, it's their life. It's like someone saying that they're eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for lunch. I'm like, okay, it's what you want to do. It's I don't have anything to say about your preferences. Or if someone wanted to wear purple polka dotted shoes, something that I wouldn't wear. My dogs are barking. And I'm like, those are shoes I wouldn't wear, but what do I care what shoes you wear? You can wear in the same way. You can do whatever you want to your body, as long as it's not harming other people. Tattoos, plastic surgery, you can do it's your right. However, it feels like with Darcy, it is getting to a point where it is relevant, at least some of the data that we've seen, to her psychology and to her self-esteem and to her self-worth, that it's possible that her plastic surgeries are related to, I don't know if that's the correct term. Is it plastic correctives? I don't know. Her procedures are related to her sense of self-worth, and there seems to be a cyclical nature to it, at least right now. I would have to know much more data to say that with any kind of assuredness. But anyway, Joy says, Darcy and Stacy understand their role with each other when there is a man threat. The hurt one shows the pain. The other goes into defensive Wonder Woman and attacks the threat. Then they hold each other and they chant girl power blurbs, and they have a period of twin unity. Then they move forward and drift apart as they find a new love interest, and the cycle continues. Yeah, that's Joy. It's very astute of you. I think that's a good way of putting it, and it seems like maybe there is a pattern there. Alicia says, this makes me wonder why Darcy and Stacy filed for divorce from their first husbands on the same day. They did. Maybe one pulled the other into it because they felt like they had to do everything together. Yeah, it's interesting this season to contemplate their enmeshment and maybe what the rules are and where it came from. I think I talked about this video. It's a good candidate is that when they were young, they needed to depend on each other for safety and security, and learned early on that the one rule of the game was you never diverge from enmeshment. You always do everything the same, because if we introduce difference between us, that could be a huge threat to the one and only relationship that we can really depend on. I don't know that. There's no direct evidence, obviously, that the parents were bad parents, but we could imagine some complications happening in Darcy and Stacy's childhood. At the very least, that they went from school to school and felt out like an outsider, maybe even bullied to some extent. And maybe that's when they decided to pull together. Maybe that was even part of their identity, particularly as they emerged into the limelight as adults, that part of their, because you just have to imagine that Darcy and Stacy, if they weren't twins, if they were just individuals, that they probably wouldn't be famous, right? They'd just be regular people. But there's something compelling about them being twins that maybe helped them to develop into what they perceive as their good life. And maybe a part of that, the rules there is like you just don't do anything different, including getting divorced at the same time. Now, we have seen in this season some flexibility on that, because Stacy is wanting to have kids, and Darcy is not, and Darcy was cool with it, and Stacy was worried that Darcy would not. So, we've seen some flexibility. Cabby says, love what Dr. Honda said about just hearing, acknowledging, and being with someone and their feelings. That's usually all I want. When people try to offer solutions or tell you how to feel, it's invalidating and frustrating. Yeah, it's a real common thing, I would say almost universal, that people are pretty poor listeners. And it's often because they have never seen good listening, or good listening to them feels so weird that it feels corny to them. And yeah, first thing, if you can learn anything from me at all, that you want to make the world a better place, when people have things to say, whether, something that's intense, or like they hate their boss, or they're struggling with parenting, or they had a good day at work, just listen. Like, establish that. You can get to other things if you want to, like sharing your own experience or trying to solve the problem. But establish the listening phase first. Really let it breathe and wait for a while. Then you might, introduce your own ideas of what might be able to help. One, it's the right thing to do. That's what all that people want. One of the best things you can do is when someone's telling you like a problem with their partner or their job or something, and you're listening and you're just like, wow, that sounds real. And you're really into it. You're curious. Tell me more. What's going on there? And, try to find that place. Don't try to put on the veil of a good listener. Actually, try to find that curiosity inside your soul, because it'll motivate good listening, and it'll feel natural and genuine to the person. And then at the end of the listening, the person telling you, one of the best things you could ever hear is, well, what do you think I should do? So at that point, the person presenting the problem has now explicitly asked you what, for advice. At that point, if you feel like it, you can give advice because they've asked for it. A step, shy of that, which is also fine, is if you absolutely feel compelled to give advice or to fix the problem or to offer some, tips, ask first. It's a wonderful question to ask. Just say something like, would you like me to give you some advice? Because I have some ideas, but I don't want to give you advice if you're not interested in that. Just say that. And if the person is like, yeah, I'm not really looking for that, okay, good, Or if they're like, sure, let me have it, and then they've said, sure, give me some advice, and now you're in a zone where you're in consensual advice giving zone. Do not give non-consensual advice. Don't be a non-consensual advice giver. Lena says, it's one thing to hear what differentiation is and another to see it happening in front of your eyes. This was a great scene to dissect. Yeah, it's that's what's so interesting about watching these shows, because I've been a professor for 25 years and have been trying to teach students and sometimes clients ideas such as differentiation the entire time. And it's it's all these different techniques. You read about it, you learn about it. I will give examples from my own life, maybe, or I might elicit examples from the students. Let's dissect this. But there is something very facilitative of education when we can just watch a reality TV show and use these concepts in the moment, because presumably a lot of what's happening on the screen is genuine and actually involving these individuals' psychologies and personalities. And it's such an interesting finding, and I'm sure other professors have thought about it and done it before, but I've never heard of it before. And reality TV has been around for longer than I've been a professor, So it's just interesting to think about how many years have gone by where professors have not exploited a treasure trove of vignettes to apply one's psychological concepts to. It's interesting, because I'll tell you, because as a professor, I'll tell you, sometimes it can get really frustrating for me as I'm trying to convey something to people, and I see them like struggling with it, and I'm just like, if they could only just sit next to me while I was in a session, or if they could only just sit next to me while I was at a party and I saw this one thing happening, and we could go, that's what I'm talking about. Then they would, oh, I get it. But and so these reality TV shows really provide that. Anyway. Danielle and Mohammed, I finally got around to doing that. I have dog hair on my face. Ika says, finally, this is the couple who put the 90 Day Fiancé show on the map. Is that true? Danielle and Mohammed was the couple that put 90 Day on the map? I didn't know that. That actually is kind of surprising to me. But what do I know? Samantha says, the conversation about crying around your children really brought me back to my own childhood. Right, so Danielle was crying in front of her kids, and I was talking about how on one hand that can be damaging, on the other hand that can be totally fine. But it depends on how you, what sort of feelings you're downloading into your kids. If you're sad and you're crying, or you're worried and you're crying, it's normal, and I'm a big proponent of having natural human emotional expressions. But the key is what is your child's experience of you as you cry. If you are crying and you're saying, mommy's having some sadness, everything's okay, even though you don't know everything. Maybe you're worried you might have cancer or something and you're crying about it. But you don't want your kids to worry about that, especially when there's a lot of unknowns. So you can have your tears, but you want to convey, like, mommy has it. I've got it under control. I have my people I can talk to. You don't have to worry about me. You don't have to do anything to save me. So there's that vibe. But then there's the other vibe of you're crying and the child is terrified because you are their foundation. And that can be very damaging. I think often what we do is we just blanket, say you could just never cry in front of your kids, which is not true at all. You want to model crying for your kids. You want to model that it's okay to laugh and cry and scream at times and, in joy or something. Samantha says, the conversation about crying around your children really brought me back to my own childhood. I was always the little therapist for my mom, and what a big difference it would have been to hear her say, look, mommy is okay, don't worry. All I ever did was worry about my mom. Right. 2-bit color pencil says, my mom used to cry a lot when I was younger, a lot of times on the phone with my grandmother talking about money. It was very scary to me. It made me develop a sort of parentified dynamic with her. And even today, I have a lot of issues making big purchases because of the amount of anxiety I get. Yeah, that's very common. Jenny and Summit. And by the way, get therapy. You deserve it. That's right up therapy's alley. Jenny and Summit. sister says, I'm married to an Indian, so I have some cultural perspective. Summit is saying he can't choose marriage over his parents, not that he can't choose Jenny. I think Summit has decided he's happy to just live with Jenny unmarried for the rest of his life. Yeah, that's what it seems to me. A lot of people in the comments really hacking on Summit because he's lying or something. I think he's kind of in denial, but I think most of him has decided, look, we can't get married because my mom and the culture, but we can be together for the rest of our lives, which is what really matters. It's similar to, before gay marriage was legalized, there were people who said, well, we can't get married because they don't allow it in our culture legally. And also, people might try to kill us in our family or in the community, but we can be together. So maybe it's not that far down the road of oppression, but maybe it is. I mean, it was been really interesting. I was just talking with the podwife the other day, last night, about how this show, it's one thing I knew that in India it was rare for people to get divorced, because as a marriage and family therapist, I follow statistics around the world, and in the United States, it's something about 50% of marriages end in divorce. And you would look at different countries, and you find that in India, 1% of marriages end in divorce. I think that's the stat, which is a very stark difference from the United States. And you just wonder, well, what is it? Is it religion? Is it family values? What is it? But to see this show, and sometimes people say, well, there's a lot of stigma and religious pressure to stay married, and you're like, oh, okay. But it's one thing to understand it intellectually, it's another thing to watch it happen in such a dramatic way and strung out over so many years, to really internalize what it is like and how almost impossible it would be for people to get divorced. Which really makes me sad for people. But that's my values, and maybe other people have different values. I guess I just value human choice, as long as it doesn't harm other people. It doesn't harm anyone that Summit get divorced. It doesn't harm anyone that Summit and Jenny get married. It doesn't harm anybody, right? So now, you could make an argument that it harms harmony in the community and the culture if they don't pressure people to do this. Like, you need things to conform, and when people conform generally, even to some arbitrary rules, it helps with harmony, it helps with safety, it helps with trust, it helps with things being smooth, if you will, if everyone follows lockstep. It's like soldiers in the military. That's why they teach marching and left, right. Not because when you're going into battle, you do that anymore. It's because you have to adopt a conformist mindset. You can't think for yourself in the middle of battle. You have to just follow orders, because when everyone works together as a team and they don't question things constantly, the idea is there's more safety. Well, you can kind of apply that, generalize that to societies as well. That it's akin to all of us in the United States could decide that, I'm just going to drive on the left side of the road or the right side of the road when I don't see other cars coming. Like on a back road or something. It is okay. You see no cars around. It's okay to drive on the left side of the road. You could just and be safe, right? But imagine if we allowed it, but that'd be really hard for someone to do. Imagine just forcing yourself to drive on the left. It's hard because we have internalized this message around conform, or else, right? Even though it's not logical, it doesn't make sense that you can't drive on the left side of the road when there's no cars around and you can see it's flat and it's the middle of the day and you can see everywhere. Or driving through a stoplight, like you're at a country four-way stop and there's a red light and there's no cars, and to just blast through that red light is hard for people when it doesn't make any sense that you would wait. There's no reason to wait. You should actually go through for your own time management. But why do we stop? Well, it's because if we allow those kinds of rule breakages, then everything starts to go into chaos, and humans aren't great when it comes to nuance and rules and as a whole. And so it's one of the reasons why a society might seemingly arbitrarily impose a rule of of conforming on people like Jenny and Summit is because of that. It's like, well, if we allow that, then it'll feel bad. All these other things will start, dominoes. Where does it end? Do we let people just disrespect their elders? It's going to get bad. And of course, I can see a world in which you allow grown adults to do what they want to with their romantic and love life and living it, and that won't cause a domino effect to utter chaos and destruction. But for some people, that might not be true. And it actually, so while I'm on this topic, if some of y'all out there are historians or political science majors, you understand in the United States, we have this Constitution. Many countries have these kinds of documents. And there are times when I politically or legally am thinking, why don't you let's just rewrite the Constitution? That thing was written 200 years ago during a time when things were different back then. So let's rewrite the Constitution with today's world in mind. Guns, the right to arms in 1776 was a musket with, you had to put the thing in, and whereas the right to bear arms, does that mean you can walk around with a AR-15 with hundreds of bullets ready to go? Like that's what I don't think that's what they meant. I don't think they meant that you could walk around with a bazooka. So anyway, without getting into the weeds on that, but there are philosophers and historians and political science people that will say that even though that would be rational, of course we should probably rewrite the Constitution given today's world. If we did that, it would potentially cause total chaos in our legal and political world that can result in governments being toppled and riots and coups and military takeovers and dictatorship. Because we treat the Constitution like it's a religious document. That's why we have judges up on high in robes, and there's respect. There's this song and dance that we play so that we will respect the conformity of it all. Because when we all agree as Americans that the Constitution, because we could all just decide, and this almost happened to us not so long ago, that certain legal processes just don't apply to us. We could just, because it's the people that are with the power. And so if we just decided, look, we don't respect that election result, we're just going to do something else, and we're going to have a new government. Like this happens in other countries. And so, and it almost happened in ours. And so there's some wisdom to being overconformist around things that might seem weird, because it keeps society in line. And when society comes out of line, very bad things can happen. Not always, though, but here's the catch. Sometimes when societies come out of line, very good things happen. Civil rights, women's suffrage, these kinds. So it's like, which direction is it going? And that's why we need to think about it. We need to talk about it. And I really hope, and I'm guessing there are, because there's a lot of interesting and intelligent people in India who I'm guessing are having these conversations around divorce and culture and law. And because I don't know in India, but in the United States, it used to be very rare to get divorced as well. And one of the very horrible effects of that is that a lot of women were stuck in extremely abusive relationships and could not get out. And when divorce became much more normalized and much more legal and more streamlined, a lot of women who were being abused had the freedom to finally leave their abusers. So, and I'm quite sure that's happening in India. I don't know to what extent, but so Yeah, that's my talk on that. Vanessa says, when I heard Summit say, I can't choose marriage over my parents, I thought he was referring to his mom's suicide threat. And after that, he said, I can't choose Jenny over my mother's life. Oh, interesting. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. I thought for some reason that was over because the parents had raised $30,000, right, to help for the divorce. So I thought that the mom threatening suicide and all that was over, but maybe it's still in effect. Kemi says, I just sat down with my tea to listen to this episode, and it was only 3 minutes long. Right. Sorry, y'all. So, when I sit down to watch the episodes, I watch the episodes, and then at the end I go back and I, cobble it all together and package it up for a video. And I never know how long of a video it's going to be, right? So for the Jenny and Summit portion, and I think there was another couple too that was pretty short, I was like, oh, I only have 3 minutes. And sometimes what I do is I just don't post it. I'm like, that's too short. And I just get rid of it. I guess one way I could do it is I could save it for the next week, but that'd be weird because I'd be dressed differently and it'd be it anyway. So I thought, well, I probably shouldn't post that, but I don't know. It felt important, the Jenny and Summit bit, even though it was very short. So I posted it anyway. The Podwife posts everything, and so I think what she's doing with the short ones is doubling some of them up. But yeah, that doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it does. And just know that I'm not happy about posting a 3-minute video and ruining your tea time. Ellie and Victor. Desiree says, you should do a video as a love letter to Seattle. The depth of your love for your city is palpable. Interesting. Yeah, some people will suggest that. By the way, I'm wearing this shirt. My cat wants to chime in. It is a tribute to Michelle, who died last year or earlier this year. And you can buy it by going to our merch site. The links should be below. You can also get this on a mug. You can also get this mug. This Take Care of Yourself mug. Have a little sip of my lukewarm coffee. Used to be hot, but I've been yammering for so long, it's now lukewarm. But yeah, a video about Seattle would be interesting. I don't think it'd be very interesting to anyone. It'd be interesting for me to make, but sometimes I get overwhelmed with there are so many things. I've lived here for so long, and there are street corners where I'm like, I have 7 memories of that street corner, of just various different things. There are just so many memories because I have never, from when I was a teen, anyway, point is I don't think anyone would be interested in that video. It'd be boring, but you're nice to put that. Caroline says, you're great, Dr. H. My husband and I watch you when we are cooking dinner, and you always bring up interesting points to think about and discuss further. Well, that's nice, Caroline. Yeah, it warms my heart to think about couples watching this together so that they can improve their relationships, really. Again, don't use YouTube as a replacement for therapy, but, for tips on differentiation or emotions or getting along, conflict management. And, but what a great thing to do, while you're cooking dinner, it's just watch me yammering. Evan says, one of the most functional friendships on the show between Ellie and Hiromi. One of the most functional friendships on the show. It was real and open. We would all be lucky to have friends like that. Agreed, Evan. Good old JD says, I almost cried at the explanation about compounded grief. I lost my mother, stepsister, and grandparents in less than 2 years. I have definitely reevaluated if I have the emotional capacity for any other intimate relationships. Right. So when we have grief and compounded grief, it can have two main effects on our ability to have close relationships with others. One is that we're terrified of losing someone again, even if it's not rational, right? Like your mother, stepsister, and grandparents died within 2 years. I'm sure rationally understand that the chance of your friend at the age of 35 dying anytime soon isn't very likely, but it feels in your body like they might just go, and because this can happen too in divorce or just breakups, that when your parents divorce, or when you divorce someone, or when you move across town and you lose touch of a friend, all those are losses and can just give your body this sense of, it could happen. The other thing is, when you have all that compounded grief, it can have a depressing effect on us and make it hard for us to want to do anything, let alone be with friends. Stephen, and by the way, get therapy for your compounded grief. You deserve it. Grief is one of the best things addressed in therapy. Stephen and Alina. But, side note, a lot of therapists don't know how to do grief therapy. Actually, research has shown that. Research has shown that a good percentage of people who go to therapy for grief are actually worse off because of the therapy. Did I say that right? A good percentage of people who go to therapy for grief are worse off because they went to therapy. Because the speculation is, and my assertion, that a lot of therapists don't know what they're doing. They have a lot of myths in their mind of like the 5 steps of grief, which aren't a thing, or they push people too fast, or the therapists have their own unresolved grief that they're countertransference wise interfering with the healing of the client. There's a lot of misunderstanding about grief in our culture and in my profession, and there's a complete lack of education. For the majority of people in my field have no education or supervision, particularly from people who know what they're doing, about how to do grief therapy, which is ridiculous, right? Because research shows something like 98% of therapists will come across at least one, if not several clients who come to them primarily for grief. And yet we have no classes on grief therapy. In my university, we try to change that, but it's hard because everything in my field moves at a snail's pace. And so we, 30 years ago, we're like, we should probably have a class on grief therapy. And then, 50 years later, we'll start to actually enact that. Anyway, Stephen and Alina. Ashley says, about Stephen's request to date other women. I grew up in Utah with lots of Mormon family members and friends. Young people in that faith are actively encouraged to casually date many partners in order to find their eternal partner. No idea, but this could be where Stephen is coming from. Interesting. Yeah, I could say, because who knows? I'm sure they'll reveal it at some point, but that would fit well with what my observation with Stephen is. Emily says, unfortunately, I have been the Alina and went through my ex's emails and texts. Both times I did it with both of my major relationships, I was correct in that they were hiding affairs and sexual conversations from me. Oh, terrible. That's terrible, Emily. I felt like an absolute terrible human being for doing it initially, but I just felt it in my body that something wasn't right and they weren't telling me the truth. Yeah, and I was kind of mulling that over when Alina was considering tricking Stephen with this bait scheme. I was like, no, that's a terrible idea. It's deceptive. It's mean. It's manipulative. But then I thought, well, what if Stephen doesn't pass? Like, what if he does flirt with her? Then does that make it okay? It's an interesting dilemma. I don't recommend it. There are much less risky ways of figuring this out. It takes time. I trust my wife. Have I ever tried to trick her into a scheme like this? No. How do I trust her? Well, I do the regular things, which is we talk about it, we express love to each other, we are around each other a lot and just kind of know. That's one of the things that happens on the show is it's a long distance, it's early phase long distance relationship. It's one thing to be together in the same town for 5 years and then you spend a couple years apart. It's another thing you're just starting a relationship as a long distance relationship that you just have no idea really what they're doing day to day. Whereas if you're in the same town, you might literally be with each other every day. So there's less worries about infidelity, at least on average, probably. Anyway, Melissa says, I've internalized these videos so much. Dr. Honda has become like my conscience. He sits on my shoulder and provides commentary on various events in my day. Both hilarious and helpful, LOL. Yeah, this is a known phenomenon in therapy and in supervision that for my clients and for my trainees, that they will say things like this. Not always, but it's frequent. And I have my own interjects that, like, I'm a songwriter, I'm a musician, and one of the very first musicians that I worked with, he was my age, but he was a mentor to me because he knew so much more about music. I didn't know anything, or I knew very little. And to this day, when I'm writing something or recording something, his voice, he's kind of like I'm sort of like the Paul McCartney, and he's sort of like the John, not in terms of talent, but in terms of role, in that he was cooler than I was and more punk than I was. And he would say things like, well, that's kind of cheesy. And so I have his voice in my head, like, don't do that, that's cheesy. And so I'm wondering, how many of y'all have me in your head in that way? Not in a, so what would I hope? I would hope that all of y'all have some interject that is helpful to you, whether it's me or someone else, that helps you, like I have my interjects. I have my mentors that are in my head helping me get through situations. And that's when the therapy is working. That's when the supervision and mentorship is working. Listener L emailed in and said, in our ward, Mormon, in our ward, we have an elderly couple who fled Russia as refugees due to being Mormon. Though it has become safer for LDS in Russia, this discrimination remains prevalent. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that, but it makes sense that in Russia you have a dominant religion, and any religion that threatens it is going to be targeted with propaganda and hatred because of suspicion, or the power structure in the dominant religion in Russia is threatened by the, pulling parishioners away from your congregation. So, it always works out that, there's always been prejudice and infighting among religions, and it shouldn't surprise me that Mormons in Russia have experienced that. It's one thing for at the pulpit to say, or at the, what do you call it, in your sermons, to say that other religion is wrong. It's one thing to say. It's another thing to target them such that they will flee from Russia because they can't be their religion in that area. That's not okay. Unless the Mormons are doing terrible things in Russia and they deserve it, which is, I guess, possible. Anyway, Corey and Evelyn finally got around to them because they're on the new season. Allison says, the healthcare provider's judgment over so when the healthcare provider was judgmental about Corey bringing his mom. The healthcare provider's judgment over having his mom being there while getting a shot is so weird to me. I have a major phobia of needles, and as soon as I get a shot, my body shuts down and I pass out. I tend to have either my spouse or mother there with me because when I wake up from passing out, I need someone to drive me home. Yeah, absolutely. Zaxia says, so happy to hear you talk about phobias and exposure therapy. My phobia was so debilitating as a teen that I contemplated dropping out of college to avoid the triggers. It's incredible how helpful a few years of gradual exposures were. I can't imagine my life right now if my phobia still dictated everything I did. It's a scary form of therapy to start, and it takes a lot of courage to continue the sessions. Yeah, absolutely. And good for you, Zaxia, for finding a specialist in that area. Claire says, I underwent exposure therapy when I was younger, not for a phobia, but for OCD, and it helped me very much. I'm so glad for you, Claire. OCD is debilitating, and exposure therapy is important for it. Haha, Rachel says, Dr. Honda, I'm curious, did you get anxious watching this video with the needles? A little bit. I'm not going to lie, my hands were a little sweaty, but I don't know if I mentioned this in the video, but I've had a lot of shots this year, so I've gotten used to it. All the vaccines. I had the flu vaccine last week, by the way. You might want to get the flu vaccine. Obviously, I had the COVID vaccine schedule, and I had shingles vaccine because I'm 50 years old, and that's what you're supposed to do. Man, the shingles vaccine. Oh, my God. I was sick for a day. Did not feel good. But my relatives, I know people who've gotten shingles, and it is no fun. So I'm glad to go through that for the vaccine. By the way, get your vaccines, people. Just do it. Take it from me and all the other experts. Well, don't take it from me. Take it from all the other experts, because I'm not a biologist. But So please. Run the Low Run says, this was so good. But how can you get therapy for a phobia about therapy? It's a catch-22. Right. So some people have fears and phobias about therapy itself. How do you get therapy for a phobia of therapy? Some people have relational wounds from a therapist in the past. And how do you get corrective experiences from a therapist when therapists were the original wound? Well, you just got to do it. You got to find the right one and you got to talk about it. But what a wonderful thing to go through for your own healing. Colt video from last week. Jennifer says, sometimes so Colt admitted he was a pathological liar. And I talked a bit about that. Jennifer says, sometimes as a kid, I would lie out of anxiety and social anxiety. If I was asked a question and the answer was too complicated for my comfort, I would just say an answer that was shorter so I could stop talking sooner. I hadn't thought about that. That makes total sense. I've been with clients, it didn't occur to me at the moment, but that would be absolutely another path towards pathological lying. Chrissy says, regarding Vanessa being married pre-Colty, at the time that came out, her husband did an interview on YouTube. He basically said Vanessa was literally cheating on him with Colt and on the computer while he was home. Interesting. Didn't know that. The Berlioz fan says, thanks for sharing this, Dr. Kirk. I used to lie a lot as a child because my parents were abusive and there was always that fear to provide the right answer. Now I find lying very stressful. People laugh when I refuse to participate in social deception games. Interesting. Yeah, we have this very strange discourse in our society about people who lie. If you just look on the internet, everyone's a narcissist, and it's this, I get it. It's, I guess it plays into this black and white evil versus good narrative that is so prevalent in I wonder if it has to do with the movies we watch. There's a lot of movies, Marvel movies, and I like them, that have to do with evil versus good. And when we see things that bother us, I wonder how much of that has to do with the stories we tell ourselves. This, instead of having stories that we consume that have nuance and humanness and gray zones to it. Anyway, at the very least, we as a society tend to look at, if we see, like with Summit, I see a lot of people assuming that Summit is this narcissistic, manipulative liar. And not everyone, but some people. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't look like it to me. I think he's a guy suffering. He loves Jenny and wants to be with her, and he has obvious reasons to avoid marrying her and is trying to please everyone and preserve their lives. So, but there's always this assumption like narcissist and liar and manipulator. And again, I suspect, or not again, but I suspect, or I'm sure I've said this in the past anyway, that a lot of us have experienced lying and deception and betrayal, and so we are projecting that. Anyway. All right, people. Well, that one, it always goes longer than I think it was. I tend to yammer a lot. And at the end, I'm always like, you shouldn't be. At the beginning, I go, Kirk, don't yammer. Just read the comments, say a couple things, and move on. And then I just love to hear myself talk. All right. Well, everyone out there, you know what to do. Take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.